Okay, so welcome everyone. Hopefully in the next 45 minutes, maybe an hour, we'll be able to cover an approach I've used that's worked very well for online tests and quizzes. And I like to think that there have been primarily successes, although I won't lie, there have certainly been challenges along the way. So hopefully some of what I've been able to uncover, some of what I've been able to learn will help you all in terms of implementing this in your courses. I am from Decision Sciences, primarily teach statistics and operations research, although I also teach an elective in finance. So from the context of what you're going to see, a little bit more quantitative focused is the courses that I cover, but there are also concepts that I do make sure are reinforced, and the quizzing is actually the method I use to do that. So, and I am from the Graziadio school. Okay, so online quizzes. There are certainly a variety of ways you can use the test and quizzes tool within the course's website. I'm really just going to be focusing today's discussion on how I use it and the particulars of how I've used it that have worked well for me. But I don't want you to get a sense that that is the limit of how it could be used. I know for a fact others have used it for actually full-blown exams or tests that maybe run several hours. In my case, I'm really talking about 10 questions. They're either in a multiple choice or a true-false format. And so what I'm trying to address with these short quizzes is concepts. Short concepts that the student should either know the answer to, or they're most likely going to have to take a guess at. I do limit the test-taking time to 15 minutes. I've actually found that is in some respects a benefit to students. Sometimes if students dwell on a problem too long or start to overthink a problem, they'll often change their right answer to the wrong answer. So that's largely to their benefit. It's also because the objective of the quizzes that I conduct online are to test that they've prepared for that particular evening of class. So that they've taken some time, some preparation, they've opened up that textbook, they've looked through some of the lecture slides that I've already provided ahead of time, and they're prepared for the class that evening. So this is certainly a motivation in that regard. I have them take it before the class begins, and I'll talk a little bit about why I do that. But the key there is that it started at a time that's convenient for students, so they can pretty much plan and schedule when they'd like to take the quiz. It's all done online. They can use their own computers. They can use computers in, say, one of the libraries on campus if they're having their own technical issues. So that's going to be the focus, is on these shorter quizzes that I've used in my classes. In fact, I've used them now for going on about a year and a half. And actually, I use them as part of the Blended Learning Faculty Fellow Program within Graziadio. So this is actually part of a number of initiatives that I try to bring into my class in a way that overall would benefit students.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
The time test, I just finished a Malibu class, and I had 2 students with special accommodations, so they get extra time for tests. How do you handle that?
Actually, I'm going to be coming up on that.
Okay,
that happened to me last trimester, where I had a student with a certified disability, a disability that was approved by an office in Malibu. Mm-hmm. And I actually developed a separate test for that individual that would accommodate the additional time required. Mm-hmm. There were some aspects that I somewhat uncovered unwittingly that were not what I really wanted, but I did find that there was a fairly easy workaround and solution to it. But I will talk certainly much more about that, because I think that actually falls into some of the challenges. Okay. So unlike a paper test where you can say, okay, I'll just find someone a different room perhaps, and maybe give them additional time. With an online quiz, there are different settings that have to be made. And then I'll talk about some best practices, some things that I've found that whenever I conduct online quizzes, I just almost use this as a checklist. Every time, make sure you do these 5 things to make sure that the maybe some of the mistakes I had made in the past or some of the findings that I discovered worked well, I continue to institute them. So, and by all means, I appreciate the questions. If you have other questions as I go, feel free to stop me. I will definitely be talking more about the students with disabilities and how that can potentially be addressed within the online quizzes. Okay, to give you, again, some context in terms of how I'm using the quizzes, I've used the online quizzes in 3 different courses. The courses are Statistical Methods and Research Design. This is a BSM program, so these are undergraduate students, typically in their first trimester at the university. So these are students that have just arrived, typically are just bought a new laptop, they're just getting plugged in, entirely kind of new to the campus environment. So one of my best practices actually addresses that. So if you have students that are a little bit further along in, say, the BSM program, some of these best practices may be, in some respects, overkill, but certainly if you have newer students, there are a couple approaches I'd recommend. 656 is my MBA class. This is a quantitative methods course for MBA students. This is also a class that students typically take in their first term, although I do have students from time to time that have been on campus for a trimester or two that might then get into 656. But this is an MBA level course. Financial modeling is also an MBA level course. It's actually an elective in the finance area, and it's typically for students that are close to graduation. So I'm teaching it this fall again for the second time. This class, I think I have about half the students that are graduating this term. So kind of the other end of the spectrum in terms of they've been on campus, they know how to get typically on the course website by now because they've, the new Sakai has been out for a while, so they're familiar with the interface. They may have not seen the online quizzes, but they have a little bit more of a comfort level there. And I should also emphasize that these are all within the fully employed programs. So both the BSM program and the MBA program, these are all working professionals. These are all individuals who are working already throughout the day, in some cases weekends, a lot of times have travel commitments. I do hold class this one time a week from 6 to 10. So that's really my face-to-face time with students. So to the extent that I can, I really do try to find things that I can give them to work that are offline, they can go off and do on their own, to give them that greater flexibility, which a lot of them frankly need in a number of cases. Okay, so that's kind of the context of how I've been using the online quizzes. Maybe another perspective on how it plugs into the big picture of what I'm doing, which is I try to diversify when I cover the material. So I have quizzes, which you'll see at the top left. I do still use traditional exams. So this is just pencil and paper, and they will write down the solutions to their exams. So I have individual assessments, which kind of flip-flop between online quizzes, which I do every week, and exams, which I do twice a term. I also have them work through assignments, which are sometimes in more informal groups. I have them practice exercises, and then I also have them work through a group project. So I don't want you to walk away with a sense that online quizzes are the only method I'm using to evaluate students. They're really just a fraction of it. In fact, I think in terms of my course grades, typically between maybe 15 and 20%. Okay, so it's a portion. I do like the fact that within Sakai, or what we're calling courses, it gives the accelerated feedback. So students learn right away when they've taken the quiz what score they've gotten. So out of 10 points, they'll learn, I think, within about 60 seconds what the grade on their quiz is. So that feedback I found is very much appreciated. And because a lot of my students are working full-time, there are unfortunate instances where they'll have to travel or be out of town, and for whatever reason can't make it to class. I try to be as flexible as I can in that regard. I always emphasize being in class is important, and I know students understand that, but sometimes travel is unavoidable. In that case, having the online quizzes is extremely valuable. They're not being penalized because they can't make it to class and take the quiz. I should also comment that actually this approach was actually set up before I started even using Sakai. So the online quizzes that I conduct today are actually quizzes that used to just be on paper, front and back of a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, pencil and paper. They just go ahead and take the quiz. Okay, so for the most part, it's just a translation from a pencil and paper environment to an electronic environment. Okay, so this is my one and only screenshot. Like I said, I'll refer to Alan and his expertise and his group in terms of specific implementation, but there are a number of items that unfortunately here show up a little bit small. Certainly the most important thing is you gotta make sure it's enabled, so make sure you turn on your tests and quizzes. I think by default it is not on, and so you'll wanna make sure it gets turned on. Then once your quiz is published, it'll actually show up here in terms of published copies. Again, I do apologize, the font is a little bit on the small side here. And what you'll see is at any given time, you'll see how many have actually submitted their exams. You'll actually see if any student at a given time is actually taking their quiz or exam, which I found to be very very useful, very enlightening. You'll see when it was released, when it comes due, in terms of the due date, and whether the quiz is active or inactive. So a very quick snapshot of all the quizzes that you might have available, that you might have already created or have already been taken by your students. The reason I circled this one is it says practice quiz. This is one of my best practices, which is especially for my students who are there on campus for their first term. They're brand new to the university. Maybe they're just starting with a brand new laptop. I like to give them the experience of taking the quiz. And actually in that instance, they have the option of taking it during one of the breaks that I set up during the evening. Because before they start being assessed on it, I want to make sure that they have some just practice on what the interface for the online quiz looks like. Because it's timed, I want them to see what the ticking clock looks like to hopefully reduce some of the stress that might be associated with taking an online quiz, as well as help them generate an expectation. And in fact, I used to do this even with the paper quizzes, so they can see how much preparation they should be devoting before coming to class. Kind of help gauge them on what some of the important concepts are. Question or comment?
Well, the tests and quizzes don't automatically show up in the choices. You have to set it up in options.
Yeah. There's, I believe, an option under your site information, under, I believe it's tools.
Edit tools.
Edit tools, yes, where you'll have to go in and actually enable that.
It's a checkbox. It's very simple.
Yeah, you check it off, you say okay, and then it'll then show up.
So essentially, the first chapter or whatever what you're doing, you just make that a practice quiz, and then you have them start counting maybe second week of the semester.
That's right. Yeah. So usually the first week of the trimester, because it's the first night, I'm going through the syllabus as well as some of the materials for those new concepts. I make it a practice quiz so they can see if they hadn't had a chance to prepare what it's like. I normally have the quizzes due by 6 o'clock, which is before the class starts. On that first night, I usually push it to 8 o'clock. So anyone that maybe registered late or didn't read through the syllabus or for whatever reason didn't have a chance to actually take that practice quiz, I will give them a chance to actually during our break time. I don't go 4 hours straight. I do give my students breaks. I'll give them a chance to actually go off and take that quiz, so they get the practice.
Usually, you have the quiz due the you said 6 p.m. Is that the night before your class?
So I've actually done it 2 ways. I used to do it by 1 o'clock on the day the class was held. I know some faculty prefer to have it done like say the day before. My initial concern was if I have it due right at 6 o'clock, maybe they'll wait to the last minute, maybe they'll get distracted, but I found my students have been pretty responsible that hasn't created an issue. In fact, in a lot of cases, they arrive because they've been working all day. They'll arrive on campus several hours early and then go ahead and take the quiz in a quiet environment. So I have found that it has worked pretty well just to go ahead and have the quiz due at 6 p.m., which is just before I start the class. Usually the last thing I'll do before I pack up my things in my office and come to class is I will just check the status of the quiz and also just do a quick scan through to see how students have done. I don't have any screenshots here, but there are very simple ways to scan through questions to see how many students got this particular question right and wrong. You can generate a wealth of statistics from the quizzes, and that gives me a very quick view in terms of where some trouble spots might be in terms of concepts, and where some of the items are that clearly they understood. They followed it. They understood the definition. They prepared sufficiently for the night, and I don't need to dwell on that as much as I go through the lecture.
So can I ask one question?
Sure.
And do you ask them to do this on material that you have yet to present?
Yes. So I cover. So this is all over new material, which is I think a change for a lot of students. They're not accustomed to coming into class and having read over material that hasn't been specifically covered. Now, I'll say, to be fair, I do have some students that have had, in like the case of my statistics class, some statistics before they've entered my class. But that's probably more of an exception. My objectives for it are not only to ensure that students are prepared, but one of my philosophies in class is I want students to learn how to teach themselves. I tell the students that, in statistics, we've got 14 weeks. I'm not going to cover every statistical concept ever developed. In fact, even within the book that I use, there are chapters that I have to completely omit simply because of time. I'm not going to try to cram in as much information over that 14 weeks. And so what I hope to instill in my students is a ability for them to be able to open up a chapter we haven't covered and to be able to have some working knowledge of, okay, I understand what some of the core concepts are. I can see how some of the applications work. And so that's my other objective of these quizzes. And I did that not only, like I said, with the online quizzes, but even in the traditional, just standard proctored quizzes. But you're right, it is over material that students haven't had, and in some cases, that does create a slightly higher level of stress. The other thing I'll say about that approach, which doesn't really have anything to do with the online piece, is I do try to make the quiz questions a little bit on the easier side. Okay. So I'm usually looking for, literally areas in the book or areas in the notes that I've given them that are bold-faced, that are definitions. I'm going to quiz them on that definition. Have they at least read what was in boldface? Have they read section titles? I'm not expecting them to have mastered the material within the chapter. I intentionally gauge those questions to be much more on the easier side.
And you do open book, right? Open note?
So for the quizzes, I don't. I make the quizzes closed book, closed notes. And in fact, because they're online, they're on an honor system. So they're expected that they're not supposed to be referring to notes or other materials when they take the quiz. The timer, in some respects, helps that, but there is an honor system component there, which is certainly not risk-free. There is a risk there that if students, want to operate in a way that, is questionable in terms of their ethics and integrity, they potentially could. I've yet to uncover any instances where that's happened, and so I'd like to believe that, that's something the students are following. The other reason I don't make it open notes is that these are concepts that they ought to have a general working knowledge on and be able to have a discussion about. So if you're going to have a discussion about something with, say, another business person or with a manager, you're not going to have a chance to go back and check your notes. I want them to have that level of proficiency. They're not going to go off and run any calculation during these quizzes. They're really just on core concepts. Okay. Did that kind of answer your question in terms of?
Yeah, and if you're going to get to this later, we can deal with it. I also approach things or have them go home and read material that I haven't taught, and then they have quizzes on that. But I don't know how I teach undergraduates. I don't think the honor system thing would probably work in my case, because if they're being tested on a concept from history, they could so easily just go onto Wikipedia and find it and then answer the question. I think. I would assume that in your case too, if you're testing on concepts, couldn't they very easily just do a quick online thing to do a search for the definition and then?
You're right. It's certainly possible, and so I'll say that's one of the reasons why I try not to make quizzes too much of their grade. I don't want them to be assessed on a portion that there could potentially be that kind of behavior on. They could start doing searches. That will certainly consume time. I've actually played around with 10 minutes for quizzes as well. I get the sense at 10 minutes, that's usually enough time for them to take the quiz, but the stress level starts to kind of ratchet up a little bit. And in fact, I've actually checked the average completion time for my quizzes is usually like 11 to 12 minutes. So I suppose there's an opportunity if they want to, start searching for things, they possibly could. They certainly aren't going to have time to search for every question online, in my case. So probably the time restriction is probably the first starting point to help ensure that. Another way to do it is you'd have to then dedicate class time, which is have them take the quiz, release it during class, and then stop it during class. Again, I'm using this for about 15% of my grade. I'd like to believe, since I haven't seen any direct evidence of it occurring, that if it is, it's very minimal, but it is a potential area for concern.
So are the problems mostly about definitions and terminology, or you have problems that could be solved numerically and be more complicated.
So I'll give you a good example of one that's numerical, and this is as difficult as my numerical problems get. I think it was a true-false question I've used. That is, your standard deviation is 2. What's the variance? Well, you square the standard deviation to get to the variance. So 2 squared is 4. That's about as complex as the calculations get. I don't go beyond that. The concepts, I'll use something like the null hypothesis states, and I'll describe, the alternate hypothesis states this. Is this a correct statement? And I'll have them make that decision.
But why not more complicated? Have you tried them and didn't work? Or
You know, because they haven't actually, we haven't gone through the material formally in
I see,
class.
I see.
We
It's
haven't.
new material.
Yeah, I'm really having them just focus on core concepts. Again, you can certainly use the online quizzes to do that, and that's why I wanted to put how I use this into context, because I think the context of how any member of the faculty uses it has to be tailored to their needs, and you need to make sure it addresses your particular approach and challenges and subtleties of maybe of your class that are different than what I'm showing here.
Do you also test the students with a different tool on the material that's been already explained in class?
Yes, so kind of the context that I provided here, traditional proctored exams, that's actually half of my students' grade. They have a midterm and final. Each of them are 25%. So yeah, they will. That's half
In
of how
class, like traditional.
traditional pencil and paper. Yes, traditional exam. Yeah. So really, the online quizzes are. I mean, they're a noticeable piece, but they're not half of the grade. They're much smaller than that.
10, 20% of the overall.
Yeah, I think I use 15% in one of my classes and 20 in the other class. Yeah.
Well, I teach a class right now, and I started. This is a new thing I'm doing. 4 quizzes over the 7-week class, and each quiz is worth a 16%. Quickly, a couple of students divided 16 on number of questions in the quiz. It was 8 questions. Wow, each question is worth 2% of the overall grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't thinking that way at all
Yeah.
at the moment. But
And I should say the one other thing I do with my quizzes to kind of help address, in some respects, the fact that the students are working, but I think also just in fairness, I do throw out the lowest quiz score. So I realize that there's going to be a week where a student just couldn't prepare as much as they'd like. Maybe they have other coursework that was taking a priority, or whatever the case might be. I just say, you know what, lowest quiz score for whatever reason, even if you don't have a chance to take it, right? Or maybe they take it and they had to log off prematurely to get into something that was work related. Whatever the case may be, I use that as kind of a catch-all, so that, to be fair, there's going to be probably a week, and I think I cover 10 or 11 quizzes over the 14 weeks. So it's just about every week. Just toss out the lowest quiz score. And that frankly I think addresses a lot of the concerns students have, which is, there may be a week where they just didn't have a chance to prepare, or for whatever reason the concepts weren't making as much sense. I also do encourage students that when they're preparing, they don't need to prepare in solitude. Especially within the business world where things are being done in groups and teams, it is to their benefit to prepare in a group study environment, or they can use online tools like Yammer. They could create a discussion thread. I mean, there are so many ways to have an open discussion. In fact, I even offer to students that if they want, we can have a phone conference before the quiz, and I'll talk to individuals or even groups about what they read prior to that night. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunity outside just an individual cracking open a book and trying to prepare for a quiz, and that's where I'm trying to get my students to get to, which is when you've got to learn something on your own, and you'll have to do this at some point in the future, there are a lot of different ways to prepare yourself. And so I really try to embed that skill, and the quizzes I've found are a very effective way of doing that.
One more question. Do you give homework assignments that count for a grade?
Yes, I do.
So the quiz is not the replacement for them?
No, and in fact, they're really quite separate in that regard, because the homework, they're actually going off and performing detailed statistical calculations,
You grade them.
making inferences, and then I go through and grade them all by hand. Yes.
And potentially, that could be done online as well. Yes.
So, yeah, I know that's not the focus here, but I guess since I have it up here, I do grade all my assignments electronically. They're all submitted electronically. I download them all simultaneously. I sync them to an iPad. I grade them. I upload them back all in. So that's all done also online. Maybe the focus for another session. Or certainly we can talk offline.
I've done that, but it's highly time consuming.
Yeah, I know it's not the focus today, but I will say I've timed it because I'm very sensitive on my time. I've actually found that it's less time total to do it online if I follow the approach that I've been using. I actually timed myself how long it took me to grade, enter in my grade book, upload it, versus doing it electronically. And I'm at about the same amount of time. And I agree, there are plenty of ways to do it electronically that would double or triple the amount of time.
So you have them, just, sorry, because I'm trying to, I had just a boatload of grading last trimester, but you have them submitted into the assignment folder in Sakai, and then you bulk download, grade, and
Right.
then bulk upload?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's actually, if the bulk, sometimes I've had issues with the bulk download and the bulk upload, and I don't know, maybe it was about half the time, but when it worked, it was great.
Yeah, I've used it for 5 trimesters now, and it's generally worked okay. Where I've had the biggest issue is the iPad software. Hasn't really matured as much as I would have liked it. Sometimes the annotations I put on to actually grade the student questions, sometimes the annotations break and the students can't see them. So, but that hasn't been an issue with Sakai.
Do you do it and track changes?
No,
grades?
I actually do them all in PDF. All the assignments get submitted as PDF files.
Oh, okay.
But let me press on because I know that our focus here today. But I'll certainly, maybe we can have a side discussion offline. I'll certainly share some of my insights with assignments. So we talked through this one. Okay, successes. I think flexibility is at the top, and I try to put these in a relative order, which is the fact that students can take them outside of class. I found is a significant benefit, a significant success. It gives them, especially for my students that are working, that flexibility to kind of take it when they need. And I've looked at when some of my students, some of them take it at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they're working a second shift, they're wide awake when they come home, they spend some time with the material, they can take it really whenever it works out for them. So that flexibility really does help a lot. And then I think I've already mentioned that I can then review statistics ahead of time. So I can see instantly how students have done on any given question. I do dedicate some of the class time to reviewing the quiz. And I typically spend more time on questions where students had a little bit more difficulty or the scores weren't as high as I would have liked. But I also provide feedback, which is typically in a page number, which if you go to the book and you look at this page, you can see a full detailed description of how you'd be able to come to the solution that was provided. So I like to do both. I like to have not only the in-class discussion, but I also like to have that feedback available to students. Another big benefit is that it reduces that class time. So you don't have to spend 15 minutes, half an hour, hand out the quizzes, have everyone take the quiz, have everyone turn it back in. You're not consuming that time in the class, which even with a 4-hour class, I still find that anything I can do to free up that time and help me get more hands-on with students and help them learn is to a benefit. So a lot of benefits there. I'll say from an efficiency perspective, I'm no longer going off and grading by hand. And since I have multiple versions of my quiz, I can't tell you how many times I grabbed the wrong key, started grading. I'm like, boy, this class is having trouble, and realized 2 or 3 quizzes in, oh, I'm using the wrong key. And so, and part of that was just simply I was trying to make good use of my time, but overlook something. With the auto grading, that doesn't happen anymore, right? In fact, it happens really almost simultaneously. Once the students submit their quiz, they see what grade they get. They can go right into the grade book and see what their grade is for that quiz. Also saves me time. I don't have to go into the grade book, manually insert the grades. Certainly a time saver there as well. So a lot of efficiency there. I don't know, maybe it's different in the other schools, but I can tell you in the business school, the students really like feedback. The more of it, the better, and the faster they get it, the better. Now, I think there are limits to feedback in terms of amount and how quick it can be provided, but for the quizzes, I find this to be probably one of the best ways to give them the timely feedback, because I'm not constrained to, it can only happen in class. This is something that they can get feedback offline and then spend on their own going through it. and seeing how they did.
I have a question about the feedback. Do you put, like, if, for the wrong answers, do you put this is wrong because, I mean, do they, if they choose the wrong answer, do they get the feedback why that answer is wrong?
Yeah, so I haven't taken it down to that level. I when I go through the quiz in class as part of the night, I will dwell on why some questions are right or wrong.
Okay.
I know there are fields within the quiz tool that allow you to do that.
Right.
I've found for my purposes, usually the concepts are pretty straightforward. Once they look at the page, they'll see, oh, this is why the null hypothesis is defined like this, and they'll see it kind of right away. I do know, though, you can do that. You can provide, in fact, there are, like I said, many features within the quiz tool that I'm not even going to really cover that are available. I just use it kind of, if they get it right or wrong, here is the feedback. Here's the page number that they can go ahead and reference to see additional information. And then I certainly then encourage.
So you do put the page number. Like,
I put the page number, but it's not on a per question. It's not on a per, like if there's an A, B, C, and D, it's not on an A, B, C, and D, it's for the entire question.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, so it's more of on a question level as opposed to, I guess, an answer level, I think is the terminology.
You do that in class, or you have a mechanism online for students to access that?
So online they can access it, and I'll put that with the caveat, it's online after the due date has passed.
Okay.
So this is another way I do want to make sure that I don't have students sharing solutions, that they will see their grade immediately, but not until the deadline is reached will they actually then have a chance to go back and see what specific questions they got correct and incorrect along with that feedback.
And
So sorry, go ahead.
you do that through the quiz tool, or you simply post that
Through the quiz tool. So within the quiz there's a field that allows you to provide really as much text as you want. I simply say see page or maybe see section of this page,
And you only release that though.
and that gets released along with the correct and incorrect solutions after the due date and time.
Is that the feedback section of the?
I believe so, yeah. In fact, one of the things I did was I actually took my settings that I use for my quizzes, which is somewhat formidable to navigate, especially when you're new with quizzes, and I actually dropped a version of it into this file, so you can actually see what any given settings on my quizzes look like. I may open it up here at the end if we have a little bit of time so you can see all the specifics, because there are so many different ways you can use the online quizzes, and again, I'm only using them in one particular way. But I do like to give the students the immediate feedback so they can see, did I do well, did I not do well? And then after we actually start to cover it in class, or once class starts, they can then go in and see the specifics of what they get right and wrong. Did that answer your questions? Okay. So they learn the quiz. After the deadline's passed, they will get the more detailed feedback. And again, I use making sure there's a link between the questions and the textbook. So in a lot of cases, there's also a link between the question and even the PowerPoint notes that I provide, which is another way students can prepare for the night. But as a default, I do like to use the textbook because there's a clear linkage and usually a more lengthy description.
I'm sorry, when online feedback provides a link between the question and the textbook, do you actually?
Not an electronic link.
Okay.
I'm using that more.
Conceptual or like.
Yeah, conceptual link. So if the question was on a definition of something,
Right.
the definition would have been provided on the textbook on a certain page. I'll provide that page reference.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not an electronic link. Yeah, that's an important one to know. And then the last one, and I call this a success just because I'm always somewhat skeptical of technology, that sometimes it can fix things, but other times it could then potentially break things or cause unexpected consequences. I still see my students are better prepared. So this is whether I was doing it on a paper quiz at the beginning of class or I was doing it online, I still see that my students are better prepared for class than if I wasn't giving the quiz at all. I didn't see that change when I switched to an online format. I was a little concerned that maybe I would. And again, it does teach students how to learn individually or in groups, like how to kind of start to learn on their own. So they're not just in class to learn the material, just digesting. They're actually going off, spending some of their own time, preparing for the night, and learning as much as they can on their own. And in fact, I'll tell you, I do get students from time to time that will say, oh, it's not fair, testing us on material we haven't covered, it's not fair. I get just as many, if not more, students saying, we're at Pepperdine, this is a reputable school, we want you to keep to these high standards, and we're glad have us take these quizzes before class because it's a great motivation for us to prepare for the night. So I mean, I can't say that I never hear any negatives about it, but I hear far more positives about it. Okay. So those are successes. Some of the challenges, I think we've already talked about the honor system. Students with learning disabilities, I think that one came up earlier. So my approach to the students with learning disabilities is actually we'll replicate the exam, we'll duplicate the exam itself or the quiz itself. And then what I'll do is I'll actually create a group. And that group will then be assigned the individuals, or in cases where you may have more than one individual with this disability, individuals that allow the student to take the exact same quiz, but with more time. It's not quite maybe as simple as I'm describing because there are also implications with the gradebook that you'll need to take some care over because the gradebook link then has to be managed. And so I guess what I'll suggest is if you do need to go down this path, you might want to consult with Alan or someone else on his team because I've only done it once. I had kind of mixed results when I first tried it because some unexpected consequences occurred. As soon as you create an additional quiz, even if it's only for a specific group, it shows up in everyone's gradebook. And so suddenly students were seeing, well, what's this alternate quiz and why is it being taken? And so it created a lot of questions. Breaking the link to the gradebook I found is the simplest way to give that student their quiz, and then just manually going into the gradebook and updating their grade with however they do on that quiz has worked the best for me. Okay. Settings, I'll say, is the other challenge, which is there are so many settings that are available. It can do a lot of almost anything you'd want. There's authentication. There are a lot of settings that I don't use. On the last page of this, I took a print shot from the settings that I use. And one of the things I'll do is I'll make this PowerPoint available after. You can go ahead and open up that file and take a look at those settings. And again, if we have a little bit of time, I'll dwell on those a little bit more. Time test is the challenge. I like the time test, but I think it also creates challenges for students. I know when they start seeing, I think it turns red when they get to within a certain number of minutes. I've gotten within 5 minutes, yeah. So students get a little bit stressed out about that. I think a little bit of stress is healthy, but at the same time, I don't want to create a hardship for my students. So there is the ability for them to hide that, but ultimately, going online, it's not all perfect. I think having the time test does create a bit of a challenge. This is probably, in fact, I guess in priority system, I kind of should have put this one higher. Anyone that's used this online quiz and test has seen that you can actually release feedback before the quiz was due, or before it was even started, I think in some cases. So students, or while they're taking the quiz or test, they can actually see the answers. There's actually the ability to see the answer. So I'm not sure what the use case or the design was around that, but I found the simplest way is to make sure that the release date and time and the feedback date and time are the same. Same date, same time. In fact, that's what I often will double and triple check because I don't want to accidentally share what the answers are, because I believe what would happen is some students would notice that, because then some students have access to the solutions, and others of them just wouldn't even be aware of it. And so I certainly don't want to create that kind of environment for my students where some are getting a benefit and some of them are not. So very important, making sure you synchronize those two, at least for the approach that I've been using. And then I'll just say miscellaneous technical issues, which is, no technology is perfect. I have had students claim that they've had web browser timeouts. I think it's associated with Safari. It could be associated with firewalls. I tell students that, and I'll talk about this on my last page, which is my best practices. If you're in any doubt about your computer, about your connection, don't use the Starbucks Wi-Fi, right? If you have any concerns over it, use the wired connections in the libraries at Pepperdine. They're hardwired in. The computers are well maintained. That is probably your risk, the approach that will present the least risk in terms of being able to successfully take the quiz.
What do you do if you have a student that says that, I started the quiz and my internet went down or whatever? Can they go back in and retake it, or what do you do?
There is the ability to allow them to go back and retake. From my own personal experience, because I'm only seeing them once a week, I've tried that a couple times. Usually by the time they get my message back, it's past the due date and time.
Right.
They usually take it within about 24 hours of the class starting. So They're usually working. Sometimes maybe they'll take it during their lunch hour.
Yeah.
So they just didn't have the time to retake it. I do know the retake capability is there. The approach I've used is I just say that quiz in its entirety, and again, this has been in rare instances, I will just completely throw it out, which means it's not part of their composite quiz score. It doesn't help them, it doesn't hurt them. It's
Okay.
not the dropped quiz like I talked about
Right.
before. It's just completely gone.
Okay.
I've had to do that, I think, over the hundreds of quizzes I've given, maybe even close to 1,000 now, 2 times maybe.
Okay. Oh.
So it's pretty rare that it happens. I have been trying to make sure students steer clear of Safari. I suspect there might be an issue there, although again, I think it's probably more of there's a connection issue from their workplace. Ultimately, there are workarounds to those, and they're pretty rare, frankly. And then I'll say the other one, which I don't know what the current solution is. I have tried to put some graphics into problems. For example, I'll say, okay, here's an XY plot. You're going to have some intersections. I'm going to look at an optimization problem with level curves. You slide the curve across at what point. So they actually have to look at a figure to be able to solve the problem. I've had some technical issues. I think those have since worked themselves out. But I will say, if you start to put heavy graphics or pictures or artwork or whatever the case may be, you might want to double check it. And I think the best way to double check it is register yourself as a student and just take the quiz. The student view within the tool sometimes is a little bit questionable.
You can register yourself and take the quiz before you release it to the students.
Yes, you can.
Um,
In fact, when I first started doing this, that's actually what I did. I created a project account, created quizzes within the project account, and gave myself my own quizzes. So I had that firsthand experience of what it looked like. So yeah, in fact, I'd say for any of you that are even still a little bit, well, what's it going to look like for my students? You can do that and really see firsthand what your students are going to experience.
So how do you register yourself as a student?
So I use my Gmail account, which is not my Pepperdine account. So just use a separate email address to register yourself into it. And I guess I'll refer to Alan for the other
Site
specifics.
info, add participants. The first box is for official users. The second box is for non-Pepperdine people. So you put in your outside Pepperdine, your non-Pepperdine email in the second box, and then it'll create your account.
Second box where?
When you go to site info,
Oh, okay.
and then the fourth button says add participants
Oh.
on the top. And then from that screen, the second box on that page, your add participants page,
Okay.
will be the outside address. And I
Okay.
strongly recommend this for any faculty members, whether it's the test and quizzes tool, whether it's electronic assignments. If you're trying to do anything that you want to preview exactly like a student would see it, not just a approximation of a student view, then this gives you a way to go through it. And you can create your own project site, which is a separate site, so it's not impacting any of your class materials at all. You're not exposing anything whatsoever to your students. And anyone, faculty members, staff members, students, can create their own project site within courses at any time. That's from the My Workspace tab. The tool is called Worksite Setup. There's a button that says New, because you're creating a new site. And then you just follow the instructions to create a project. It's pretty straightforward. But all of the tools that you would have in your class are available in the project site.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I say, I did this initially where I registered myself in a class, but I found pretty quickly I got comfortable with it, and I didn't need to do that for every class. I really just did it initially to help make sure I was comfortable with what my students were seeing. Because at the end of the day, I didn't want to, I wanted to keep using the quizzing, but I didn't want to create a burden for my students or create additional complexities for my students to have to deal with, and especially for my students that were literally first time on campus, brand new to the university. This is one of their first impressions. I didn't want that to be a negative one. I wanted to be as positive as possible. But frankly, I don't think I register myself in my classes currently. I pretty much, I'm comfortable now that I've used it for a few terms. So best practices. I've talked about the first practice quiz. I do this now every term for every class that I use online quizzes for. I always give them that practice quiz. It not only gives them familiarity with the interface and the timer and the feedback and how it links to the grade book, but for students in their first term, they're just getting onto the course's website for the first time. they may not even know any better. This gives them a very quick introduction into that. I also like the randomized solutions. That's just another way to help, ensure the integrity of the quizzes. You do have to be a little careful if you like to use a thing like all of the above. All of the above may not be the last option. It may jump it to the first, and that can create some confusion. I'll tell you, whenever I've run into these instances where I didn't notice I had an all of the above in the solution and it randomized it, I just threw the question out. I went in and manually gave everyone credit for that quiz question. I've found that that's been the best approach. If there's ever any issue with the technology, the image didn't show up, the question wasn't clear, there was one particular problem where something didn't quite look right, or somehow the format looked terrible. This is pretty rare, but in those cases I just say, you know what, we'll throw that question out. I want the students to learn from it. I don't want them to feel challenged by the technology. Okay. Providing feedback for each question, I find that's useful. Also from my own perspective, because then I can kind of look, well, what touch points in the textbook or within my notes am I really hitting on this quiz? So it not only helps my students kind of have a traceability back to what they've prepared for, but it gives me the ability to see, okay, what parts of the particular chapter or chapters are really being covered within the quiz. Let's see. This is a new one, and I like it. There's the ability when you publish a quiz to notify students that it's available. I really like it since I only see my students once a week, and then in some weeks I'm online, so I'm not seeing them for 2 weeks face-to-face. Having this automatic notification, which is I believe just an email blast to the class saying this quiz is available now, it's available until this day and at this time, it's timed at say 15 minutes, a nice reminder to students they've got to go off and take this quiz before then. I really like that. I will say in terms of publishing, and I actually didn't put this in the slides, but I probably should have, I also try to make it a point to not publish more than one quiz at a time. And that's more so to prevent students from taking the wrong quiz. Right? I don't want to have 2 quizzes available to a student, they prepared for one, and then suddenly they took the wrong quiz. So I do try to make an effort to only publish 1 quiz at a time. There are settings that could enable the one quiz not becoming available until a certain date and time. That's another approach, but I would certainly suggest for like the daily, or the weekly quizzes, only make 1 available at a time. Don't let your students potentially start the wrong quiz. Once the timer starts, it doesn't stop. And so if they run out their 15 minutes, they've run it out. The only option you have is to allow them to retake it at that point. So I only try to make one available when I publish at a time. And then I think I've already talked about, if there are connection issues, use the Pepperdine libraries. The computers are fast, they're efficient, they're very reliable. That's certainly worked out well for me in the past. And I've had a few students that have actually done this, especially when they're new and maybe they're using a work computer that they're not sure if they're going to use on campus. They're kind of seeing if it's working and they're having issues. I just say go to the library, use the library computers. So that's actually all I had. I did provide my email address here as well, and I'll provide a copy of the PowerPoint slides. Maybe I'll just do one more thing, which is this is actually my settings file, so if you open it up, this is actually a quiz that I'm giving to my students this term. Here actually I did use the availability date, so it wouldn't become available until a certain time, but here's the due date. I don't want to go through every line in here, but what you can see is that all these settings have to be enabled to publish a quiz. So a lot of kind of stuff to remember as the students take and as you're setting up each quiz. I've gotten personally better at it, but I still find it as a challenge to have to go through and, oh wait, did I say it was this one or this one? Like I don't accept late quizzes, so I have to set that one up. The feedback, so I do like to provide feedback. Here's where the date and time has to be identical to the date and time that the quiz is due. Okay.
Or can you have it later, like the feedback comes in later?
You could even do it later if you really, or you could say no feedback at all. You can say immediate feedback, which is as soon as they take it. So there's lots of different.
And this is brand new. They'll only release the overall scores, but don't give them questions at all.
Oh, I didn't even notice that one. I haven't even.
Brand new.
Oh, okay. Very good.
So this is for folks who are worried about students copying and pasting answer keys afterwards. If they're really concerned about that option would give them what they every question 1, 2, 3 they got these scores, but it doesn't expose the questions and the answers. numerical grades. It just doesn't expose.
So it gives you another layer of information for the students, but doesn't tell the students what the right answer was.
Yeah, I mean, on a learning point of view, I don't know. That would be helpful if you're going to go over the quiz in class, because otherwise they're not getting feedback. You know, they're just getting a number. They're not seeing which question did I miss. You know, they know they got question 2 wrong, but what was question 2, and what was the answer that was right if I got it wrong?
Right.
So you'd have to go over it some way, but this would be for those faculty members that want to go over those quizzes in class. They want to give the grade, but they want to also protect, so to speak, protect their exam. That would be an option.
Is it possible to click that and then after a certain date, release it and do it the way that he does it?
Oh yeah, like that date that he mentioned.
Yeah, so
to
is it
release.
possible so that initially, I guess these are questions, tech questions.
You could always come back in and change these settings afterwards.
You can, okay.
You can come in after the exam is done, you could come back in and change your feedback delivery options.
Mhm.
And then the links would be available or not available.
Yeah, I mean, I could personally say that usually students, all they really want to see right away is, did I get 10 out of 10? Did I get 8 out of 10? Did I get 6 out of 10? They want to get a kind of a course estimate of, you know, did I do okay? Did I seem to miss the point? And then once the class starts and the feedback becomes available, not only will they be able to see the feedback and see all the details of what they answered versus what the correct answer was, but then we will spend time in class. So I think it's a great new feature. I don't know if I'll be using it personally, but, and I'll say that's true for a lot of these features. There's a lot of features in here that I don't use, that I'm sure it would benefit other faculty members. I just thought it would be worthwhile to show this snapshot because there are so many settings, and if you were trying to design a quiz closer to maybe how I've done it, you might even want to use this as a starting point.
Can you send this to us?
Yeah, so this PowerPoint package, maybe I'll collect emails at the end here, or
Yeah.
maybe there's a way for...
But why don't I collect emails at the end, but also if you want to, I'll post it with the recording of this on our website as well.
Okay.
If you're okay with that, just that,
Sure.
that PDF being shared.
Yeah, because all I have there's no sensitive information in this PDF file. It just says the name of the file. I do have grades sent to the gradebook. These are just the settings within a particular quiz that I recently had published. I just sent to the printer, sent to a PDF file. Okay, and that actually is embedded in this last file. Oops. Yeah, I think that was, so that's really, that was it. That's all I had. So, are there any other questions or comments?
This has been very helpful.
Oh,
Thank
good,
you for
good.
doing this.
And I guess the other thing I will say about I'll say this about technology in general, but about the quizzes is I think it's perfectly okay to proceed slowly. You know, if you have, say, existing set of quizzes and you want to do, say, just one quiz over the term and try it out, or maybe try it out as a practice to see how your particular material works. I'm a firm believer in incremental use, and then as it works, you can continue to leverage from it. You know, like in my case, I had to bring in my quizzes, so the quizzes already existed. I wasn't as concerned about the questions, I was more concerned with the implementation. But if you're creating entirely new quizzes, you know, obviously you'll have a different set of challenges. So I definitely encourage an incremental approach, and that's actually why I provided my settings file, because I think if you wanted to follow a method that was very much like what I did, that would be a good starting point for your settings. And you don't have to figure out, well, wait, what does this one mean versus this one? I think one of the settings basically flips to a new web page every time you answer a question, which is very beneficial if students run out of time, because as soon as the students run out of time, whatever they've clicked will automatically be submitted. It won't be potentially lost. So there's, I guess, some other ancillary benefits that that kind of come up, but as a starting point, I found it somewhat daunting to figure out, well, geez, which settings do I want? What if I choose this one versus that one? There are so many different outcomes depending upon what your preferences are. The settings file might not be a bad starting point. And again, I would definitely refer to Alan and his team in terms of detailed expertise on if you chose this option versus this option and tying it back to what your overall objectives are.
Thank you.